everybody, and welcome to another episode of the Gimme presented by Bet365. Why the Gimme? Because it's good. That's why this week, the Travelers Championship from the heart of Connecticut, one of my absolute favorite on the annual schedule. We'll talk all about the festivities at TPC River Highlands. I'm Jason Sobel. He is Spencer Aguiar. Put up on the show, you know what we do every single week. Favorite outrights, favorite props, matchups, first round leader plays, one and dones, and so much more. Before we get going, though, got to tell you all about how the Gimme is presented by Bet365, the world's favorite sportsbook brand. Sign up with promo code ACTION, ACTION, to get Bet365's exclusive sign-up offer in New Jersey, Colorado, Ohio, and Virginia. Bet $1 and get $200 in bet credits. For new users in Iowa, bet $1 and get $365 in bet credits. Terms and conditions apply. Gambling problem? Call 1-800-GAMBLER. Take a look at the top of the board at Bet365. There he is, the man who is seemingly near the top of the board every single week. Scottie Scheffler, number one player in the world. He's now got 3 straight top threes, 5 straight top fives, 17 straight top 12s. He is plus 650. And Spencer, I think there's a very good chance, obviously, because he's the favorite, but this could be the week where Scottie Scheffler essentially finds the hole with a few more putts, and he's what we call the card killer and just ruins any other outright bets we make this week.
Yeah, it's really difficult with Scottie Scheffler, and he's putting together an historic season from a tee to green sense. Like, if you look at any of the data and you find what he's done this year, it rivals Tiger Woods and Tiger Woods' prime with the numbers he's putting together. So you always have to worry in these elevated events. And I think that's like the one thing for everybody out there listening. And whether it's Scottie or it's Rahm or it's Patrick Cantlay, and I know we'll talk about him more for this event, there are a lot of names near the top here. And I think that's something that everybody needs to be aware of, because it's not one of your, run-of-the-mill events where the bottom of the board is going to be weak, the top of the board isn't as strong. Like, there's a lot of good players here. I do tend to believe somebody near that top range is going to win. It just depends on if you can figure out who that person is.
Yeah, exactly. We've seen some long shots here in the past, but the last 3 years, not exactly. We'll get into that in just a little bit. But like I said, Scheffler plus 650, Jon Rahm, Patrick Cantlay, each plus 1,100, Rory and Xander, both plus 1,200. And Victor Hovland rounds out that top tier at plus 1,800. As usual, we've got $100 to spend in our portfolios. We will start with the outrights. And Spencer, where are you going with your first one?
I don't want to spoil things, but I think this is a player that we both like a lot this weekend. I was able to grab him on Monday inside of the Bet365 enhanced market at 13-1. Still think you can find that price in the 12s if you shop around. It should still be there on Bet365 also, but Patrick Cantlay 13-1 for me. That's going to be $15 of my $100 budget. Like, I had a very specific way that I wanted to build my card this week inside these outright bets. It's interesting, and we kind of talked about this a second ago. I've seen a lot of answers throughout the space where it's been a popular path where people seem to be taking a handful of long shots and then marginally ignoring the top of the board. The problem with that strategy in general, though, is we're still talking about an elevated event with the top players in the world. I don't know, Jason, for you, where the cutoff point is. And like, I guess for me to be like Andrew Putnam, Brian Harman, Keegan Bradley. I don't know if you have any names you want to add to that. Like, that's kind of the last group of players that, like, I would not be shocked if won this event. I don't know if you have anybody you want to add to that, Jason.
Yeah, I like the number on Shane Lowry, who I won't mention.
Sure.
There's a couple guys that I won't mention in here, guys that have won bigger events. Keegan Bradley is a guy that I have just a little bit of. I'll give you another name in a few minutes here of a long shot play that I will mention here on the show. Harris English as well. Like, yeah, guys who have won bigger events. I'm probably not dipping down into the triple digits and not dipping down to someone who's never done it before. I just don't see someone out there who's a long shot, a big long shot, that's never won an event before. It's got to be someone that's been there, done that.
That's my mentality with it, and that kind of goes to the specific nature that I wanted to build this card. So, it's Cantlay in that 12 to 13-1 range. It's an honorable mention here. I'm not going to mention him, but like a Tony Finau, I think at 35-1 is really interesting. And then I wanted a shot between that 50+ range of a player that I was going to target, but really it comes down to like 3 golfers that have win equity that have won on the tour before of how I'm trying to build that. And when we look at Cantlay specifically, he carries his course history about as well as any player on tour. We've seen that from him historically at events like the Shriners and the Memorial. That's two events where he's been a top 5 machine. And while we are still waiting for that high-end mark from him here at the Travelers, there are a few interesting answers to discuss here for a golfer that has posted 5 consecutive top 15 finishes at this track. I think the first key to the puzzle is that Cantlay has generated 17 of his last 20 rounds in the 60s at TPC River Highlands. That shows that steady production, that the ceiling is about to burst at the property. And then perhaps more importantly than that, he did technically have his ultimate breakthrough on this course last year when he ascended to the top of the leaderboard before that tumultuous 76 that he shot on Sunday that completely ruined his chances. And that's another thing that I think everybody needs to be aware of. Like, don't always just look at the result of what somebody posted. There's a lot of times where the result went south when a player was in contention and it doesn't show up on the list here. Cantlay graded first in all 3 critical iterations of how I ran my sheet, including that all-important upside answer. And I do think, and this is going to be a very controversial take for all the reasons that you just talked about, Jason, I actually think Cantlay should be the betting favorite here, even over Scotty Scheffler. And that is an answer that I have not had in about the past year where somebody has eclipsed Scotty Scheffler on my sheet. That's kind of how much my model thought the upside was for Cantlay.
All right. Well, you make a lot of great points there, and a lot of points I'm about to agree with because my first outright is Patrick Cantlay as well. Remember, Spencer, when you got in early and had the enhanced number at 13-1, I said, hey, get that bet in for me as well. So I'm going to get him at 13-1 also.
Exactly.
So I'm getting in on some of that. But yeah, I like Cantlay for a lot of the same reasons. I don't know if I'd go as far as to say you should be the favorite this week. Scotty Scheffler's proven himself in that market. I do like Scotty this week. Look, I've started a lot of DFS teams with Scotty and Patrick Cantlay and then try to find some value down the board. But like you said, almost a statistical anomaly with 5 top 15 finishes and no top 10 finishes. That's kind of hard to do, even if you were trying to do that. But you make an excellent point in the fact that too often we look at a player from the previous year, 2 years earlier, and we go, oh, he finished 11th. Not bad. As opposed to, oh, he was the leader through 54 holes and then just blew up on Sunday. Maybe some of that was due to the enhanced pressure of being in the lead. Maybe some of that was due to 1 or 2 really poor shots that left him in a bad spot. I think you're right. Too often, instead of maybe kind of rewinding in our minds what happened, we just sort of look at the overall result and go, oh, pretty good, I'll play him again, or not that great, I won't play him again. So I do like everything about Cantlay, and I'll throw in the fact that he's due. I mean, look, this is a guy that's 6th on the PGA Tour in total strokes gained. I say it, I think, every single week on the show. That's the greatest barometer of performance that we have on the PGA Tour. And so he's played well enough to win. He hasn't done it since last year's BMW Championship. It's coming. Usually this is the time of year where he starts playing better. I think it comes this week. And, oh, by the way, you go way back, and this is 14 years ago when Patrick Cantlay was an amateur playing at UCLA, got an invitation to play the Travelers Championship on a Friday afternoon, finishing on number 9, nearly holed out for what would have been the most improbable 59 in PGA Tour history. Instead, tapped in for a 60. He's still got those good vibes. The people in Connecticut remember, too. They love Patrick Cantlay there. And one last one, his caddy, his new caddy, Joe LaCava, Connecticut resident, Connecticut native. Look, I'm just saying, for a walk down Narrative Street, it can't hurt. Who's your second guy?
I'm going to take Sungjae Im at 60-1 for $3. I think anything 50-1 plus that you can find out there will certainly work. I mentioned that there were 3 players that I wanted to use outrights for this week. Cantlay's obviously the name at the top. I talked about Tony Finau, who's going to be that forgotten answer here. I'm going to save him for a different market. I thought for Finau anywhere 25 to 30-1 plus would be the best. You can find 35-1 out there if you shop around, so that's going to be very easy. However, I am very intrigued with Sungjae Im at the 60-1 number. Like, Jason, I'm not exactly sure what's happened to him in the past 4 events for him to miss 3 of 4 cuts and only produce a 41st place finish. That's going to generate a floor that exudes the potential for another missed weekend or a low-end finish. But the high-end marks always are there to try to highlight to find a long shot. And that's something in my model to where, you know, if you don't have the victory and you don't get the winner, a last place finish is technically as good as the second there. So I'm trying to shoot for the upside in any of these more volatile markets here. My model found that increased projection when we looked at weighted tee to green for TPC River Highlands over a generic course. It also located the second projected forecast of any player in this entire field when combining Pete Dye and TPC courses into one metric. Like most stats that we're going to talk about, and maybe this goes back into your original point of Scotty Scheffler here, that only trailed Scotty. But I just think eventually the juice becomes worth the squeeze to take a shot on Sungjae at these long shot numbers. Like anybody out there that wants to say that he can't win when he was 25 to 30 to 1, sure, I can buy that narrative. He wasn't winning at that price, but it's a different game when the price stretches out this far on a golfer with a ceiling that outweighs his price tag once it does enter into anything that's 50 to 1 plus. So I really like Sungjae's potential here. It doesn't mean he's not going to miss a cut. Like him and Finau, if we're being technical here, are the two biggest differentiating qualities that I had between upside if they pop and then downside if they don't put it together where they can miss the cut. I mean, I guess Justin Thomas would be the third choice there. Although the one thing with Thomas is he doesn't climb quite as high from some of the recent statistical form that I have from him from Sungjae and Finau. But that's essentially like the three golfers where you're going to get that boom or bust result.
And it's funny because I was going to mention that name to you. I wanted to follow up. Justin Thomas can be had for 60 to 1 in a lot of books right now. I think he opened at like 70, 75. Obviously, played really poorly last week. Shot 81 in the second round of an event where even qualifiers weren't failing to shoot 80. So, it was bad. He said afterwards he was embarrassed, but I don't think he's as far off as those numbers seemed. Would you ever try to chase Justin Thomas, who, look, he's got a lot of motivation. Right now, he's outside the top 70 to make the FedEx Cup playoffs. If he doesn't make that, all of a sudden he's now chasing to get into the designated events next year. A lot of good stuff comes of being in the top 70, but a lot of bad stuff comes when you're not in the top 70 as a superstar player. Is that a guy that you'll look to add either this week or down the line a little bit?
I'd like to keep an eye on him. I think he's a player that I'd like to see it turn around just ever so slightly with him. Like if I'm going to take an unknown quality here, I'd rather do it with Sungjae, but Justin Thomas, 44th overall for me in my model. That's as low as I've ever had him from running my data before. He does jump up to 11th for upside. So that's what I'm talking about of that positive trajectory there. He slips to 75th for safety. He's a boomer bust play. I think if I was going to back him, I might prefer doing it as like a top 10 wager, just because he hasn't been in contention for such a long time here that I don't know if like the very first time he gets himself back into contention, he wins the golf tournament. But at some point, he's too good of a golfer for this not to turn around. I guess the only thing, and I don't know what's going on with him. I don't know if there's a hidden injury. I don't know if there's anything going on that we don't know about behind the scenes with him. But it's been a shocking season for him, for one of the most talented golfers that we've seen in quite some time.
There's whispers of a hip injury right now, but I think that he's going to bounce back fairly quickly. I won't be on him at all this week. Spoiler alert, not taking JT right here. That said, Billy Horschel was sort of in the same spot at the Memorial Tournament, opened with an 84 3 weeks ago, and now all of a sudden he's starting to shoot better scores. He's not in contention right now, but it's coming, and it's coming very quickly. I can see a similar sort of progression for Justin Thomas over the next month or two. Speaking of the Memorial Tournament, let's get to my second outright, a guy that looked like he was in control down the stretch, bogeyed the final hole in regulation of that event, wound up losing in a playoff to Victor Hovland. But Denny McCarthy, we've always known, is one of the better putters on the PGA Tour. If there's any surprise in him being fourth in strokes gained putting this season, it's that, wow, I can't believe he's not in the top three. But fourth, obviously, still very good. The iron game, the approach game, has gotten much better as well. He's kind of narrowed the gap between those two categories. And so I like McCarthy at what should be a birdie fest, as it usually is, something in the high teens, mid to high teens under par, will win this golf tournament. If Denny gets hot, and really I will admit that he hasn't, surprisingly, for an East Coast guy in a Northeast event, bent grass greens, should be his type of golf tournament. Hasn't played well here in the past, but I really feel like this is a great event for Denny McCarthy to show up and contend for, just like he did at Muirfield Village. I got him for 80 to 1, 10% of the portfolio. Okay, as mentioned, TPC River Highlands is the host course, near and dear to my heart as a former Connecticut resident. I've gotten a chance to know Andy Bissett and Nathan Grube, the tournament director, and so many of the people from top to bottom at the Travelers Championship who do a tremendous job every single year. And they've been rewarded this year by having a designated event and having almost all of the great players on the PGA Tour in their field this week. 6,852 yards, par 70. That's right, one of the shorter tournament courses we have on the PGA Tour schedule. I mentioned earlier, this used to be a place for long shots, from JJ Henry to Ken Duke to Freddie Jacobson to Ches Reavie. Over the last 3 years, even before it became a designated event, Dustin Johnson, Harris English, remember Harris English was playing like one of the world's best players at the time of his victory, and Xander Schauffele last year. Those are 3 big guns in a row. It's kind of hard to go chasing a long shot when we've seen all these big names over the last few years. All right, let's get to the player market bet. Spencer, who you buying?
I'm going to be buying Shane Lowry. You mentioned him a second ago. 46 or better, $16 for me. My model didn't necessarily believe that Lowry was going to win the tournament with the way that I ran my data, but it's many of those safety answers that I found that will play well, whether it's in matchups, placements, over under positions like we have here. Lowry ranks 6th for me in expected total driving when recalculating the metrics to fit TPC River Highlands. And then I thought the biggest takeaway to this whole thing was the improvement that he received with his putter when given these specific split textured greens that he's going to get this week. He ranked 107th for me with his flat stick on any generic course on tour, climbed to 43rd when faced with similar green complexes in the past. If we can get that steady contribution from him with the putter, I do think a top 46 is well within his grasp. And I mean, in reality, he can work it up a little bit more than that. Like when I say he can't win the tournament, like I don't mean that he's not going to win the tournament. I just think he's more likely to produce a top 10 or 20 than he is to go out and win. And we could give that same general sentiment about a lot of players, but anytime that Lowry has the ability that the putter can get better, and I think that that's what we see here with the splits that my model has, like that's where the upside comes into play a little bit more for him.
Yeah, I think that makes perfect sense. And I do like Shane Lowry as well this week. All right, I'm going to buy a guy whose name I've mentioned a few times already, but Harris English was in contention for what, 3.5 rounds, I guess, at the U.S. Open last week, kind of semi-contention on the weekend. But I spoke with him after a few of those rounds doing the post-round interviews for U.S. Open radio, and Harris is in a really good place right now. Did not seem like last week was too big of a moment for him. He's been a world-class player. He's getting back to the place where he's a world-class player, healthy once again, and confident in his game. At 52nd or better, I think that's a great number for Harris English, and I will throw 10% of the portfolio on that. Spencer, I know you don't have a sell, so you can give us 2 buys instead, right?
I'm a positive person, Jason. Like 2 buys sounded better to me than adding a sell here. Plus, like I hit Wyndham Clark last week at 100 to 1. I'm in a buying mood right now. I'd rather buy players than to sell them. But I think if I was trying to take the route of selling here, I'd probably just rather bet somebody to miss the cut in that like 60th or higher range. I thought there were a lot of players that were intriguing to take on there. I do think you have the flip side of this answer where a golfer like Seamus Power at 69th or better, that's another place I was considering going there. It was a very small margin difference between Power and KH Lee for me, but KH Lee 68th or better, $16. I think his safety plays a lot better than Powers does here when making the cut is going to be such a big part of this answer. We see that with the weighted scoring, the proximity totals, the tee to green numbers. All of those get a projected increase for me inside my model at this track. That's one of the reasons why the floor is a little higher than the boom or bust nature that I just talked about with Power. And then while the profile isn't perfect, I always like him at these shorter TPC courses that allow him to use his around the green game. Like many people forget, there's a reason why the moniker for him became TPC Lee for a really long time. And now all of a sudden, like maybe the recent form hasn't been as great as everybody has wanted over the past, couple months here, but I don't think it's that bad. I think the perception around him is much worse. And I think that at these TPC properties, he does possess more upside here. So whether we're talking a DFS answer, whether we're talking a placement sort of a bet here, there's a lot of ways to consider playing him on a golfer that, a year ago, if you mentioned a TPC property, the whole entire industry would have been out there trying to buy this ticket. And now all of a sudden it's like, make the cut and give me a little bit better than that. I'm going to take my chances with KH Lee here.
That makes a lot of sense. You didn't sell anybody. I usually have a really hard time finding someone in the player finishing position bet market to sell. And yet the guy I'm selling this week is the whole reason that you're buying, because I'm selling the guy that won you that 100-to-1 ticket last week. Look, all accolades to Wyndham Clark. He was fantastic last week. I wasn't sure that he could withstand the pressure of a final round in contention and holding the lead against the likes of Rory McIlroy and Scotty Scheffler and Cam Smith charging and guys like that, Ricky Fowler in the same pairing. And yet he was able to do that. So more power to Wyndham Clark, who's on the verge of being an absolute superstar. Love everything about his game. Except for this week. He was on Good Morning America this morning. He's going to be doing the car wash and talking to everybody on every TV show. At some point, the dude's going to wear out. And when he does, I don't expect to see him on the leaderboard this week. In fact, even the last 5 years when he's come to TBC River Highlands, he hasn't played that well. 3 missed cuts in 5 starts at this golf course. I'm taking Wyndham Clark at 45th or worse, throwing 15% of my portfolio on it and hoping that he has a safe trip home with the U.S. Open trophy on Friday evening, where he can go celebrate with all of his friends. All right, let's get some props. Spencer, where are you going with your first prop?
I like Andrew Putnam this week, top 40, plus 165, $16 of my budget there. You need more upside as you move up the scale for these positional bets. Like a top 10 will need more of that boom or bust nature that we want to look for. A top 40 is more like a matchup here where we're trying to find safety. It doesn't mean that Putnam can't or won't miss the cut, but my model did have him as the highest floor of any golfer in this field that was priced at 100-to-1 or higher on the board. He's 3 for 3 in his career at this tournament in making the weekend. He's also trending with 3 consecutive made cuts in all events. That's highlighted by not finishing outside the top 45 in any of those starts. I just think we have a reasonable enough expectation because of his past TPC success and then his quality putting on the surface to anticipate that Putnam is more likely than not to punch a ticket into round 3. And then kind of as I was talking about, like obviously we're going to need a little bit more upside than the KH Lee play, but at some point it just comes down to what can he do from there to work himself up further up the leaderboard here. So, I think there's a lot of players in that general range. Like we're taking a step up here with Putnam, but top 30 of my model from an overall sense, he was top 25 for me for safety. The negative trajectory came into play for upside, but we don't need that upside here for a top 40. Like a 31st place finish would be perfectly fine to punch that ticket if that's where he finishes.
All right, so I'm going to go with the prop on Russell Henley. And before I get into it, I want to ask you this question. If you were making the odds this week, and I know you're looking at models and everything, what would Henley's number have been to you outright?
Give me 1 second and I can tell you what a fair number is. I mean, it's going to be less than what the number was. And I do want to throw this out there. My model is always very bullish on Russell Henley, even before we get to like a positional course. 40-to-1 was a proper number for me.
Okay. And I'm seeing 35-to-1 in some markets. Maybe I just sort of underestimated him. I thought the number would be something closer to 50, even 55-to-1 for Russell Henley. He is shorter in most books right now than Matt Fitzpatrick, Hideki Matsuyama, Shane Lowry we talked about. Give me a few others. I think he's right on par with Tom Kim, who a lot of people like this week. I am like you, searching as I'm talking right here and finding some other names that are right there with him. He is shorter than Ricky Fowler, who was in contention last week, than Sungjae Im, who you mentioned earlier, shorter than Max Homa, Cameron Young, Jason Day. I mean, there are a lot of big names on the board that have longer odds than Russell Henley this week. So originally, and I was starting to work on all this stuff while I was at the U.S. Open at LACC last week. And originally I'm like, Henley's going to be a nice play. He's now gained strokes with his irons in 8 straight events. Also gained strokes with his putter in 6 of the last 7. I mean, everything's really converging. I feel like Henley is a guy who is underrated just by the general public. We never talk that much about Russell Henley. He doesn't win that often. Well, you never look at him and say, boy, that's a superstar player, or that's close to a superstar player. But he's overvalued. That's a weird combination of underrated and overvalued in the marketplace. I might have a little piece of him outright just because I don't want miss out and be kicking myself, but the number is too short for an outright. I will, though, take him for a top 10 this week at plus 350. I think that's a decent number. I'm throwing 40% of the portfolio on it just because I like Henley that much this week. You okay with that?
I mean, I think anytime you get Henley on a short course, a TPC property here, he's been inside the top 20 of my model for Pete Dye courses, top 25 for me when I add a birdie or better percentage for all those things I just talked about. The total driving is obviously going to be great. He's the number one player in my model for driving accuracy. And I think you could make an argument, even with this being a short course, like there is a 3% dispersion of scoring that takes place off the tee. Some of that does come from distance. So I'm not technically negating distance from the equation here, but it kind of goes back to like Cantlay's number one for me in total driving when I looked at it that way. All of a sudden, Russell Henley goes from a guy that you don't think of him as this guy who's going to gain a ton of strokes off the tee. He's going to do it from an accuracy sense here. And that's why when you get him at one of these shorter courses, he can propel himself up the leaderboard. But 10th in my model overall, like that's as high as you're ever going to see Russell Henley get.
Yep. Again, outright number, didn't love it, but I do like him for props. All right, let's get to our matchup. So what do you got for a matchup?
Beau Hossler, minus 115 over Sam Stevens. That's going to be $32 for me. As always, that is going to be the biggest play I have in the head-to-head market. Hossler versus Stevens is not necessarily that prototypical matchup I look for, since both guys rank in the top 10 of this field for consecutive cuts made. I said it the last time I was on the show, Jason. I'm sure I'm going to say it a million more times on various podcasts. My handicapping of matchups stems from trying to find miscut equity, which means I'm attempting to win the wager before Saturday. I think that's the most advantageous way that you can approach this. It's hard to give that pitch when Stevens has been the blueprint for consistency here as of late, but there are some course-specific intangibles that my model found highly alarming for his projected finish at the Travelers. He shifted from 34th in expected tee to green output on a generic course to 119th when running my data for this track. It also found the identical downside took place with his proximity totals. That was a mark where he dropped from 37th in this field to 114th because of the decrease from shots outside of 175 yards. You can add that to his distance that is probably going to get slightly negated. I know I just talked about like the potential that you can still hit it long here. I still think accuracy is the blueprint that you really want to look for here. There's a shaky short game that ranks outside the top 75, both on and around the green. I can't help but feel like the venue won't be a proper setup for him to find success. You know, in fairness, I don't necessarily trust Hossler myself because of his up and down nature with his irons, but that's still something that we encounter almost every single week with him on any course. There isn't this bucket range where we see massive deviations. I think that helps Hossler more than most players, because if he's just outside the top 100 in every single area, there's not necessarily a venue where he becomes much better than another. And we know he has the short game to find success at all these tracks. And with this being smaller than average greens, I do think Hossler's going to have a better ability to salvage par in some of these potential situations that he finds himself in. And I worry a little bit that this is where the wheels fall off for Stevens, and this might be the miscut that he hasn't had over the past like 2 months here.
Yeah, that makes sense. Stevens does a lot of his damage with driver. He's a big hitter, and so I think on this golf course, maybe that's neutralized a little bit. All right. The entire world is on Tom Kim this week. I get it. He's sort of a momentum player. When things aren't going that well, they usually don't go that well for a while. Now that he's coming off an 8th place finish at last week's US Open, you expect things to go better for a while now on a shorter golf course. Should be right up his alley. I actually like him when he's hitting long and mid irons into greens as opposed to hitting wedges into greens. So I don't love him as much as the entire industry loves him this week. But again, Siwoo Kim, who faded down the stretch on the weekend at LACC last week, I will take Tom Kim. I want to have a little piece of him. So I've got Tom over Siwoo in a battle of the Kims, minus 110, just 10% of the portfolio. Like you, I do like to put more of a percentage into the matchups than some of the other plays. But I just, that was one that I liked. I usually like a plus money play where, like you, I'm finding a guy who I think can contend against a guy who I think can miss the cut. I don't know that that's quite this, so I'm not putting that much into it, but I do want to have a little investment on Tom Kim this week. All right, first round leader play. And boy, this has been a very interesting marketplace over the years. The last 4 years, some of the names that have led or co-led after the first round: Kramer Hickok, Satoshi Kodaira, Ryan Armour, Bronson Burgoon, Zach Suker, Mackenzie Hughes twice. There's a lot of random names on that list. Where are you going with yours?
I'm not going to go so random with mine. I'm going to say Tony Finau, 45 to 1, $2. Kind of like I talked about, Sungjae and Finau are interchangeable for me in the sections that I use them this week. I'll have that outright on Finau at 35 to 1, just like I'll have a first round leader on Sungjae at 60 to 1. I wanted to try and attack that high end nature that each golfer had at prices that drifted, I believe, further than what I deemed to be proper. Finau ended up grading as one of 11 players in this field to post top 50 marks across the board in all 7 categories I ran this week, which includes a third place rank for expected scoring when mimicking the data for this track. That is the potential that I want to see for a wager that requires a first place return if we want to give ourselves a chance to win. Goes back to what I talked about at the beginning of the show. It's important that we forget about the downside when we're playing these markets. We want to get a victory when it comes into play. We want to shoot for as much upside as we can. I always tend to think that people play things too safely in these markets. You don't necessarily realize the potential upside that comes into play because you're so worried about the downside. And I believe that is one of the worst ways that you can view any futures market that you're looking at here. It's obviously going to come down to value, but I like Finau this week as a first round leader. I like Sungjae as a first round leader. Those are the only 2 bets I have. But for this show, Tony Finau will be the play.
Well, you said don't play it safe. I'm not playing. I'm playing it a lot less safe than you are this week. Yeah. I wrote up Ben Martin in my preview for a first round leader play. And I started looking. I'm like, Ben hasn't played as well recently as he was over the first 3 months of the season. That said, I'm going to pivot to another Ben Griffin with an 8:25 a.m. tee time at TPC River Highlands. He's 110 to 1. He's got 13 sub 70 scores in the first round in 23 stroke play events. Look, looking at some of those names that I mentioned, there's been a lot of variance in first round leader plays at TPC River Highlands over the last half decade. And so I'm just trying to hit a couple of dart throws here. And so I will probably have a little Martin too, but Ben Griffin's going to be the play here and maybe a couple other triple digit numbers as well, just to kind of hit on a Kodaira, Zach Suker, Bronson Burgoon kind of guy who's out there. So again, only 5% of the portfolio, but I don't mind, like I said, a few different plays instead of, hey, look, you can take Scotty Scheffler from first round leader, but I can take a whole bunch of guys at, a tenth of the unit that you used and spread it around on some bigger numbers. And I certainly like a play like that. All right, only a couple of minutes left. Let's get to our one and done play this week. I'm feeling we're going to be on the same page once again.
Yeah, I'm going to roll with Patrick Cantlay here. I think that if you still have him available, this is the best spot to use him. As I talked about, he rolls his course history over better than almost any single player on tour. First in my model in total driving. I think the big key to this equation here, and we can talk about his iron play. He's 53rd in my model in proximity. He does see a 23 spot improvement when I do a weighted proximity for this course. You're telling me that the irons are going to get better for the player that I have to be the number 1 total driver. This feels like the spot where Cantlay has been flirting for too long to win one of these tournaments again soon. I think this is the spot where he ends up getting himself back over the hump. So I'm going to take Patrick Cantlay for my one and done.
Ditto on all of that. I'm taking Cantlay here as well. And since you broke down all the stats, I will break down the strategic play on this. And I think that a lot of one and doneers from what I've seen are still getting used to sort of the new the brave new world out of the PGA Tour, which is the majors aren't necessarily the big events anymore, unless you have a one and done pool where it's like, hey, we're going to double, triple the money for major championships, which I know some of those are out there. And then, of course, they're worth a lot more. But last week at the U.S. Open, the winner got $3.6 million. This week at the Travelers Championship, the winner gets $3.6 million. We should no longer only look to use the best of the best at the biggest events. Use them anywhere where there's a big first place check. This is certainly one of those this week. So I have no problem using Patrick Cantlay. I don't look at that as wasting him or burning him or anything else. That is not the case in one and dones anymore. So a little recap here. Spencer's got outrights on Cantlay and Sungjae Im, buying Shane Lowry and KH Lee, a prop on Andrew Putnam, matchup Beau Hossler, first round leader play on Tony Finau. I am taking Patrick Cantlay and Denny McCarthy for outrights, buying Harris English, selling Wyndham Clark, prop on Russell Henley, matchup on Tom Kim, first round leader play on Ben Griffin. That's all we got, guys. We appreciate you. Thanks so much for watching this episode of The Gimme presented by Bet365. For more content this week, every week, go to actionnetwork.com, the Action app, breaking down everything out there, including our best bets file, which will be posted very, very shortly. For Spencer Aguiar, I'm Jason Sobel. Good luck with all of your bets for this week's Travelers Championship. Here's hoping you guys hit the green.